In 40 years on the bench, I've seen defendants arrive with expensive lawyers, family support, and carefully prepared defenses. But nothing prepared me for the morning when Harold Chen, 87 years old, Korean War veteran, walked into my courtroom alone, carrying a single manila folder and the weight of 6 decades of service to a country that seemed to have forgotten him. That Tuesday morning started like any other traffic court session. Speeding tickets, parking violations, routine matters that usually took minutes to resolve. Then my clerk called the next case. The State versus Harold Chen, failure to appear, contempt of court, and driving with expired registration. An elderly man stood up from the back row, moving slowly with a wooden cane, wearing a faded suit that looked older than most of the people in the courtroom. His hands trembled as he made his way to the defendant's table. No lawyer, no family, just an old man and a folder held together with a rubber band. "Mr. Chen," I said, "do you have legal representation?" "No, Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady despite his age. "Can't afford a lawyer. Social Security doesn't stretch that far." I looked at the case file. 3 charges. Failure to appear for an initial court date 6 months ago, contempt of court for that failure, and driving with registration expired by 2 years. Standard stuff, until I read further. The initial traffic stop occurred because Officer Davidson noticed Chen's vehicle registration was expired. During the stop, Davidson discovered Chen had missed his court date for a previous citation. What should have been a simple fix escalated into criminal charges because Chen never responded to court notices. "Mr. Chen," I continued, "you're charged with serious offenses. Failure to appear and contempt carry potential jail time. Do you understand the severity?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." "Why didn't you appear for your original court date?" Harold opened his folder with shaking hands and pulled out a stack of papers. Hospital admission forms, medical bills, treatment records. "Your Honor, I was in the VA hospital, emergency surgery, complications from shrapnel wounds I received in Korea 60 years ago. Doctors said the metal fragments shifted, damaged internal organs. I spent 4 months in intensive care." He handed the documents to my clerk. As I reviewed them, the timeline became clear. Chen's court date was scheduled for March 15th. He was admitted to the VA hospital on March 10th with life-threatening internal bleeding. He remained in critical condition for 8 weeks, followed by another 8 weeks of recovery. "Mr. Chen, why didn't you notify the court about your hospitalization?" "Your Honor, I tried. I called from the hospital 3 times, left messages. No one returned my calls. I wrote a letter explaining the situation, included copies of my admission papers, never heard back. When I got out of the hospital, I found court notices threatening me with arrest." I looked at the case file again. No record of phone calls, no mention of a letter, no documentation of Chen's attempts to communicate his medical emergency. "Mr. Chen, do you have proof you contacted the court?" He pulled out more papers. Phone records showing 3 calls to the courthouse, each lasting less than 1 minute. Voicemail. A certified mail receipt showing he sent documents to the court clerk's office. The tracking number showed delivery confirmation. "Your Honor, I served my country for 4 years in Korea, fought at Chosan Reservoir where temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, watched friends freeze to death in their foxholes, came home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge that war even happened. No parades, no recognition, just go back to normal life like nothing happened." His voice remained steady, but I could see his hands gripping the table edge. "After the war, I worked for 40 years as a machinist, paid my taxes every year, never broke the law, never asked for special treatment. When I got sick, I went to the VA hospital like I was supposed to, did everything right. And now I'm standing here facing jail time because court notices went unanswered while I was unconscious in intensive care." I checked the prosecutor's file. The assistant DA assigned to the case was Jennifer Morrison, young, efficient, by the book. She stood up, ready to argue for conviction on all charges. Your Honor, Mr. Chen failed to appear regardless of circumstances. The law doesn't provide exceptions for medical emergencies if proper notification isn't filed through correct channels. Mr. Chen's attempts to contact the court were insufficient and improperly documented. Counselor, I said, Mr. Chen was in intensive care. He called multiple times. He sent certified mail. What more could he have done? Your Honor, proper procedure requires filing a formal motion for continuance with supporting medical documentation through the court clerk's office during business hours. Phone messages and letters don't satisfy legal requirements. I looked at Harold Chen, 87 years old, standing alone against a system designed for people with lawyers who understood formal motions and proper procedures. A man who served his country in brutal combat, worked his entire life, followed every rule, and now faced jail time because he didn't file the right paperwork while dying in a VA hospital. Mr. Chen, I asked, what happened with your vehicle registration? Your Honor, the registration expired while I was hospitalized. When I got out, I was too weak to go to the DMV. My savings were depleted from medical bills the VA didn't cover. I couldn't afford the registration renewal plus late fees plus court fines. I was trying to save up enough money to handle everything at once. But you were still driving. Your Honor, I had no choice. The VA hospital is 40 miles away. I have follow-up appointments twice a month. There's no bus service, no family nearby. Uber costs more than I can afford on Social Security. If I don't drive, I miss medical appointments. If I miss appointments, my VA benefits get suspended. I was trapped. The courtroom was silent. Everyone could see what was happening. An elderly veteran caught in a bureaucratic maze that punished poverty and illness with criminal charges. Your Honor, Morrison continued, while we sympathize with Mr. Chen's situation, the law is clear. Failure to appear is a criminal offense. Contempt of court cannot be excused by medical emergencies if proper notification procedures aren't followed. Driving with expired registration is a violation regardless of financial circumstances. She was right legally. The law didn't care about context, circumstances, or the impossibility of filing proper motions while unconscious. The system demanded compliance with procedures that assumed everyone had resources, knowledge, and capacity to navigate bureaucracy while fighting for their lives. Ms. Morrison, I said, what sentence does the state recommend? Your Honor, given Mr. Chen's failure to appear and contempt, we recommend 30 days in county jail, suspended on condition of 18 months supervised probation, plus fines totaling $2,500 for all charges combined. 30 days in jail, 18 months probation, $2,500 in fines for an 87-year-old veteran whose only crime was being sick and poor while trying to survive on Social Security. I looked at Harold Chen, still standing at the defendant's table, back straight despite his age, maintaining the military bearing that 60 years couldn't erase. A man who served with honor, worked with dignity, and followed every rule until the system made following rules impossible. That's when I did something I'd never done in 40 years on the bench. Mr. Chen, I said, I'm dismissing all charges. Failure to appear, contempt, and driving with expired registration dismissed completely. Morrison stood up immediately. Your Honor, the state objects. Counselor, sit down. I'm not finished. I turned back to Harold Chen. Mr. Chen, you attempted to notify this court of your medical emergency through every means available to you while fighting for your life. You called multiple times. You sent certified mail with documentation. This court failed to process your communications properly. That's not your failure. That's our failure. I could see tears forming in the old veteran's eyes. Furthermore, Mr. Chen, you were unable to renew your vehicle registration because medical bills depleted your savings, and you continued driving only to reach VA hospital appointments necessary for your survival. Punishing you for choosing life over legal compliance would be unconscionable. Your Honor, Morrison tried again. The law doesn't provide. Ms. Morrison, the law provides judicial discretion, and I'm exercising it. Mr. Chen served this country with honor in combat. He worked for 40 years paying taxes. He tried to follow every procedure while critically ill. This court will not add to his suffering by punishing him for circumstances beyond his control. I stood up from the bench and did something else I'd never done in 40 years. I walked down from the bench, approached Harold Chen, and extended my hand. Mr. Chen, thank you for your service. Both in war and in the decades of work that followed, this court owes you an apology for failing to process your communications properly. Harold Chen shook my hand, tears now flowing freely down his weathered face. Your Honor, I just wanted someone to listen, to understand, to see that I tried. I see, Mr. Chen. This court sees you, and this court thanks you. I returned to the bench and issued my final order. All charges dismissed. Furthermore, the court is ordering the clerk's office to immediately issue Mr. Chen a fee waiver for vehicle registration renewal. Mr. Chen, take this order to the DMV and they'll renew your registration at no cost. Your Honor, the court doesn't have authority to waive DMV fees. Then I'll pay them myself, I said, pulling out my wallet. How much is registration renewal plus late fees? The clerk checked her computer. $340, Your Honor. I wrote a personal check and handed it to the clerk. Process this immediately and provide Mr. Chen with documentation showing his registration is current. The courtroom erupted in applause. Spectators, lawyers, even court staff stood and clapped. Harold Chen stood there crying, overwhelmed by a system that finally showed him mercy instead of punishment. After court adjourned, I learned more about Harold Chen's story. He fought at Chosin Reservoir in November 1950, one of the most brutal battles in American military history. Temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. Chinese forces surrounded American troops with overwhelming numbers. Marines and soldiers fought their way out through frozen hell, carrying their wounded, refusing to leave anyone behind. Harold Chen was 19 years old when he watched friends die from enemy fire, frostbite, and exposure. He carried wounded soldiers through snow while bullets tore through the frozen air. He survived 17 days of constant combat in conditions that killed thousands. He came home to a country that barely acknowledged the Korean War existed. No victory parades, no national celebration, just silent veterans who went back to work, raised families, and carried memories of frozen battlefields where they left pieces of their souls. Harold worked for 40 years as a machinist, never missed a day of work, paid taxes every year, raised 2 children alone after his wife died young. He asked nothing from anyone, followed every rule, lived quietly with dignity and honor. Then his body betrayed him. Shrapnel fragments from a Chinese grenade, lodged in his abdomen for 60 years, shifted and tore through internal organs. Emergency surgery saved his life, but destroyed his savings. Recovery took months. And while he fought to survive, the legal system moved forward without him, issuing warrants and filing charges against a man who was unconscious in intensive care. That night, I received a call from my clerk. Judge, you should know that after you dismissed Mr. Chen's charges, 3 people in the courtroom came forward to help him. One paid his outstanding medical bills. Another arranged free transportation to his VA appointments. A third is helping him apply for additional VA benefits he didn't know he qualified for. The next week, I implemented new courthouse procedures. Any defendant who claims medical emergency as reason for failure to appear gets immediate review by a designated court officer who contacts hospitals to verify. Phone messages about medical emergencies get documented immediately. Letters with medical documentation get processed within 24 hours. I also started a Veterans Assistance Program in our courthouse. Every veteran who appears in court without representation gets connected with pro bono lawyers who understand VA benefits, medical issues, and the unique challenges veterans face navigating civilian legal systems. 6 months later, I received a letter from Harold Chen. Dear Judge Caprio, I'm writing to thank you for seeing me as a human being instead of a case number. For 40 years, I felt invisible. The war I fought in was forgotten. The sacrifices we made were ignored. When I got sick, I felt like the system just wanted me to disappear. But you listened, you understood, you showed mercy when the law demanded punishment. You reminded me that honor still exists in places of power. Thank you for your service to justice, just as I once served my country. With deepest respect, Harold Chen. I keep that letter in my desk drawer. On difficult days, when the law seems cold and the system seems broken, I read it and remember why judicial discretion exists. Because laws are written for general situations, but justice demands attention to individual circumstances. Because following rules blindly leads to cruelty, while wisdom requires understanding context. Harold Chen taught me that sometimes the most important thing a judge can do is recognize when the system has failed someone and choose mercy over mechanical application of law. That sometimes justice means dismissing charges, not imposing them. My father used to tell me, Frank, the law is important, but compassion is what makes the law just. Harold Chen needed compassion more than he needed legal procedure. He needed someone to see his decades of service, his attempts to do everything right, and his humanity buried under bureaucratic charges. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, justice without mercy is cruelty, and sometimes the most powerful thing a court can do is recognize when someone deserves better than what the law mechanically demands. Harold Chen served with honor. He deserved to be treated with honor. And on that Tuesday morning, justice finally remembered what honor looks like.